The Grand Belgrave Hotel gleamed under the early morning sun, its marble lobby echoing with the distant hum of vacuum cleaners and the clinking of silver cutlery in the breakfast lounge. I walked through those familiar glass doors like I had, for the past 12 years, heels clicking on the polished floors, clipboard in hand, ready to start another day of perfection. My name is Julia Carter, and until 2 hours from now, I was the general manager of this 5-star sanctuary tucked away in Charleston's historic district. I'd built my reputation here, not just as a manager, but as the quiet backbone of the entire hotel. My staff respected me, my guests adored me, my regional directors, they tolerated me, so long as I kept the numbers up. And I always did. That morning started like any other. Front desk briefings, double-checking VIP arrivals, resolving a late-night complaint from a honeymoon suite. The usual dance. I was midway through reviewing our new reservation system when I received the email, subject, urgent, please report to HR. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the lobby. HR? No context, no details. Just a request to come immediately. I walked to the 5th floor, heart drumming steadily. In the conference room sat Helen from HR, and beside her, Thomas Green, our newly appointed regional vice president. His promotion last quarter was unexpected, and from the moment he arrived, things began to shift. Meetings became more secretive. Procedures were changed without my input. Rumors of restructuring whispered down the halls like wind through broken glass. Julia, please have a seat, Helen said, eyes fixed on a file. Thomas didn't look up. I sat back straight. Is there an issue? I asked calmly. We've received reports, Helen began, of financial mismanagement regarding vendor contracts and guest refunds. I blinked. Excuse me? Specifically, allegations that you authorized inflated payments to a cleaning service connected to a former employee, and that you approved unauthorized refunds to certain guests without proper documentation. My breath caught. That's absolutely false. Every expense has gone through the audit trail. Nothing I've approved hasn't been logged. That as it may, Thomas interrupted, this morning a full investigation was launched. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending further review. Please surrender your badge and hotel phone. It felt like a trap snapping shut. My stomach turned. Suspended? Without even seeing the evidence? It's protocol, Helen murmured, avoiding my eyes. I handed over the badge, fingers trembling. As I walked out, staff looked up, some confused, others already whispering. I had no idea what just hit me, but one thing was clear. Someone wanted me gone. And they wanted it to look like I did it. To myself. For the first 2 days, I sat in shock. How could they accuse me of something so calculated? I paced my apartment, reading over every email, every memo, trying to find what they might have twisted. Then something clicked. Thomas had personally overridden several of my budget proposals. He had access to my approval codes. He was also the one who suggested that cleaning vendor during a staff shortage last fall. That contract wasn't mine. It was his. And I had the email thread to prove it. That was the moment grief turned into quiet fury. I opened my private Google Drive and started a folder, Belgrave Files, Redemption. Over the next 2 weeks, I sifted through old communications, downloaded policy handbooks, and reached out to 2 former assistant managers who had resigned after Thomas took over. What they told me confirmed everything. Thomas was orchestrating a sweep of upper management, replacing longtime managers with his own people. He needed someone to take the fall, and I had been the perfect target. Competent, well-liked, not political. In other words, disposable, but I wasn't going down. Quietly. I met with an employment attorney, started documenting everything. I found 3 emails where Thomas pushed through guest refunds under my name. Emails I'd never sent. I requested metadata verification. The timestamps showed they were approved from his device while I was on leave in Arizona. It was enough to scare HR if I got that far, but I needed more. I needed the smoking gun, and I knew exactly where to look. The Grand Belgrave was a palace of polished deception. Marble floors, gold-plated elevators, concierge desks staffed with smiles so rehearsed they could sell poison as perfume. But beneath the gleam and grandeur, I knew every crack in its foundation, because I'd helped build it. I was Julia Carter, the invisible architect behind its reputation. And now, the place I'd nurtured for 12 years had become the stage for my downfall. But they'd made a mistake, one I had quietly engineered years ago. The data archive room on B2 was a forgotten relic from a time before cloud storage. Most assumed it was just old file cabinets and inventory logs. But during a system upgrade 5 years ago, I'd converted a portion of it into a locked server cabinet. It wasn't official. It wasn't logged. Only I and Marcus, our former IT manager, knew it existed. I called it my vault. I stored sensitive files, internal complaints, and backup copies of documents too risky to leave on the company network. Most called me paranoid. Now that paranoia was my only hope. The only challenge? I no longer had digital access to anything. HR had revoked all credentials, and the hotel's internal network was now under Green's watchful eye. But they forgot something: the physical key. I had it hidden behind the photo frame of our first Belgrave management team, back when integrity still meant something. I taped it there on instinct years ago, never thinking I'd need it. Now it felt like a lifeline. I waited for Friday night. Weddings made everything chaotic. Security light, managers distracted, eyes elsewhere. I dressed. Simply, black jeans, dark blouse, sneakers, no makeup, no jewelry. Just shadows and silence. I entered through the valet garage and used the service elevator override pin. Still worked. The machine groaned down to B2. No cameras, no alarms, just the hum of forgotten corridors and stale air. The archive room was colder than I remembered. I unlocked the cabinet. The server blinked to life like an old friend reluctantly waking from a long nap. I logged in. Password: Carter 1945, enter, .access granted. I held my breath as I opened folders I hadn't touched in over a year. And there, it was, evidence. Clear, time-stamped proof that Thomas Green had personally created vendor contracts using administrative override. One file showed the cleaning company he accused me of favoring had been inserted by his login credentials weeks before I'd even seen the invoice. And the kicker? He forwarded it to me after backdating the origin, making it look like I approved. Manipulation that subtle required planning. Malice. I kept going, refund logs, guest accounts edited from devices I'd never used, transactions made when I was out of state, everything tracked back to his laptop ID, TGRVP01. I wasn't just being framed. I was being erased. I copied it all: PDFs, logs, emails. Compressed, encrypted, and uploaded to a hidden cloud folder labeled Truth and Consequences. I backed it up to a flash drive, slipped it into my coat, and turned off the lights. But as I exited the hallway, a familiar voice stopped me. Julia, I turned. Jerome, the night shift maintenance lead. Loyal, observant, trusted. I thought you were suspended. I was, I said. Now I'm cleaning up what they tried to bury. He looked around, then leaned in. Word is Green's pushing out half the old staff, bringing in his own. HR's scared. People are staying quiet because they've got families. You weren't the first? That hit me harder than expected. I nodded. I won't be the last either, not if I let this go. Back at my apartment, I opened a bottle of wine and stared at the screen. Files in order. Evidence preserved. But how to use it? HR? Useless. They were already compromised. Legal action? Maybe. But slow. Risky. Easy to bury. I needed something public, immediate, unignorable. Then I thought of Sarah Lynn. 2 years ago, she was Belgrave's sharpest PR manager, until she resigned abruptly. Rumors whispered she'd clashed with Green over a celebrity guest scandal, that he forced her out. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but I still had her number. I texted. It's Julia Carter. I have something you'll want to see. It's thy time. 5 minutes later. Come tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring everything. Sarah's townhouse hadn't changed. Minimalist, calm, and meticulous, just like her. She greeted me with no small talk. Just coffee and a flash drive. You too? She asked. I nodded. Framed. Suspended. They're preparing to fire me. She opened her laptop. Then it's time we burn his kingdom down. Sarah had files. More than I expected. guest complaint forms that had been rewritten, internal reports edited before being sent to the board. Even screenshots of emails where Green promised vendor contracts in exchange for kickbacks, messages she had secretly backed up after being told to forget she ever saw them. I was scared back then, she admitted. Now, I'm just angry. We spent 3 straight days in my apartment building a case. Our timeline went back over 3 years. 2 women, dozens of manipulated records, hundreds of pages, 1 name. At the center, Thomas Green. But we didn't want just revenge. We wanted spectacle. The Belgrave Annual Investors Gala was 1 week away. Every major shareholder, board member, executive, and press affiliate would be in the ballroom. Green would be front and center, shaking hands, lying through his teeth, and we would be there too. I began crafting the drop, 2 full copies of all. Evidence, digital and print. 1 for HR, 1 for the press, 1 for the board, 1 for legal. Sarah wrote the press packet like a war declaration. I recorded a personal statement. My name is Julia Carter. For 12 years, I was the woman who made Belgrave better. When I refused to be someone's scapegoat, they tried to destroy me, but I kept the truth. And now it's time to let it speak. I bought a new blazer, polished my heels, packed the drive in a silk pouch, and secured it beneath the inner lining of my clutch. Thomas Green thought he had ended my story, but I was only halfway through writing his. The Grand Belgrave had never looked more opulent. Chandeliers blazed with gold light, violins played in delicate harmony, and the scent of fresh orchids clung to every inch of the air. The Investors' Gala was the hotel's crown jewel, a lavish event where board members, stakeholders, and society elites gathered to sip vintage champagne and congratulate themselves on profits they barely understood. It was the perfect place to wear masks. But this time, I wasn't wearing one. I stepped out of the black car in a tailored charcoal blazer, heels clicking like a countdown across the marble floor. My hair was pulled into a sleek bun. My face, calm, unreadable. In my clutch was a single USB drive. Labeled in embossed gold, Truth and Consequences. Thomas Green stood near the ballroom doors, flashing his signature smile to anyone with a fat wallet or familiar name. He wore power like cologne, overbearing and nauseating. As I approached, his smile faltered for just a second. Then came the performance. "Julia," he said, as if my name tasted sour. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight?" "That makes 2 of us," I replied smoothly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I thought you were on leave." "Funny. I thought you were under investigation." He forced a laugh, then leaned closer. "You showing up here doesn't look good. Walk away now, and this might stay quiet." I smiled. "That's the thing, Thomas. I'm done being quiet." I left him standing there, jaw tight, and entered the ballroom. Sarah Lynn was already inside, working the room like the PR professional she was born to be. She greeted old contacts, whispered updates to allies, and discreetly slid preloaded envelopes into the hands of key investors. Each packet contained a summary of Green's misconduct, timestamps, documents, and the promise of public exposure if the board refused to act. We had a system. I'd handle the board chair directly. Sarah would cede the room. The journalist we contacted was watching from the press section, her phone ready to stream the moment we gave her the signal. The lights dimmed, the music stopped, the stage lit up. Thomas took the podium like a man certain of his immortality. "Good evening," he began. "Tonight is not just a celebration of success. It's a promise that the Grand Belgrave will continue to lead the industry with integrity, innovation, and excellence." I almost laughed. He continued, spinning a fantasy about record profits, expansion, and staff loyalty. My name was never mentioned, but every lie he told rested on the grave he thought he'd buried me in. When the applause died down, I stood. "Excuse me," I said calmly. All eyes turned. Thomas froze mid-step. I walked to the stage, heels echoing, like gunshots. I turned to face the crowd. "My name is Julia Carter," I began, voice steady. "I was the general manager of this hotel for 12 years. 2 weeks ago, I was suspended on false charges. Charges fabricated by the very man standing behind me. Gasps, whispers. Cameras lifted. I continued. I have with me irrefutable evidence of financial fraud, guest manipulation, and cover-ups. That traced directly back to Mr. Green. Every document, every transaction, every lie. Recorded, verified, and backed up. Green stepped forward. This is absurd. You have no authority to... I turned to him. You gave up the right to silence me when you forged my name and tried to destroy my career. I handed the USB to the board chair, whose face had turned an impressive shade of white. Then I faced the audience again. If Belgrave values integrity, then you'll investigate. If not, this goes public. Tonight. Sarah gave the journalist a subtle nod. Her phone was already recording. The room erupted. Security moved. Lawyers whispered. The board huddled. Green shouted something incoherent as he was pulled aside by 2 hotel executives. I stepped off the stage and walked to the bar, heart pounding. Sarah joined me moments later, smiling. How do you feel? She asked. I sipped my drink. Like someone who just set fire to a very expensive curtain. She grinned, and made damn sure the cameras were rolling. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in a quiet suite across town watching social media explode with clips of the speech, the confrontation, and a dozen hashtags calling for an audit of Belgrave. It had begun. And for once, the truth wasn't buried. It was broadcasted live. By morning, my name was trending. Justice for Julia was everywhere, on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. News outlets had picked up the live stream. Bloggers were dissecting every second of the confrontation. Even former guests of the Grand Belgrave were chiming in with their own stories. Complaints long ignored, refunds never processed, staff members dismissed unfairly. The board called an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. I wasn't invited, but Sarah was. She walked in like a storm in heels, carrying a binder of documents and a freshly brewed cup of coffee. Green tried to challenge her credentials. The board chair shut him down. The evidence has been deemed credible, they said. You are to step back until a full investigation is completed. Green didn't go quietly. He shouted. He threatened. He accused me of sabotage, of collusion. But the more he flailed, the more they saw what we'd seen all along. A man who thought he was untouchable. A man who believed the rules bent to his name. That afternoon, I received a call. Julia, we'd like you to meet with the interim oversight team tomorrow. Quietly, of course. They didn't want headlines. They wanted containment. Agreed. But I brought my own lawyer. The meeting was stiff, formal, and cloaked in corporate language. But behind their guarded tones was something else. Respect. For the evidence. For the strategy. For the fact that I hadn't just exposed a criminal. I had done it with precision, control, and dignity. I hadn't burned the hotel to the ground. I'd simply turned on the lights. We'd like you to return. As acting GM, one of them said. Temporarily. To stabilize things. I blinked. Temporarily. For now. Optics matter. I didn't say yes. Not yet. Because I didn't want to step back into a system still built to silence people. Like me. I wanted to rewrite it. That night, I stood outside the Belgrave and looked up at its glittering windows. It still looked like it always had. Flawless from the outside. But I knew what was happening inside. Panic, speculation, a sudden scramble. To realign loyalties. I walked through the lobby like a stranger. Some staff nodded cautiously. Others avoided eye contact. But one young housekeeper paused. "Thank you, Ms. Carter," she whispered. Outside, Sarah waited by a coffee cart. She handed me a latte. "So," she said with a smirk, "queen or nothing, I..." Sipped. "Nothing," I said, "until I rewrite the whole damn rule book." The next 3 days were a whirlwind. I received dozens of emails, from old colleagues, strangers, even former competitors. Some offered support, others issued vague warnings, and a few offered veiled threats disguised as friendly advice, reporters called. A major media outlet offered me an exclusive. I declined, for now. The story wasn't finished. Behind the scenes, the hotel was unraveling. Without Green at the helm, staff grew nervous. Investors were skittish. Department heads were in limbo. And the oversight committee? They were desperate for me to save them from a PR disaster. I used that desperation. I returned not as a supplicant, but as a shadow. I quietly reviewed vendor contracts, payroll records, disciplinary files. I spoke with staff in supply rooms and service elevators. I asked questions no one had dared ask before. Everywhere I turned, I found more rot. Vendors that had been overcharging for years, staff who had been pushed out for speaking up, HR files filled with incomplete reports, red flags ignored, patterns hidden. Sarah and I met each night like wartime generals. We built a roadmap, not just to clean up the mess, but to redesign the entire power structure. You can't patch a sinking ship, she said. You build a new one. On the 5th morning after the gala, I dressed in gray slacks, a black blouse, and no jewelry. Clean, controlled, focused. I walked into the executive boardroom, not as someone asking for a rollback, but as someone ready to take control. I will return, I said, but not as acting GM. I want full executive authority, HR, operations, compliance, vendor relations, training, all of it. And I want Sarah Lynn reinstated as Director of Ethics and PR. The board chair shifted in his seat. That's significant. No, I said. It's the bare minimum. You don't just need a face to stabilize things. You need a new system. And we're the only ones who've proven we know how to build one. They deliberated, whispered. One of them even checked their phone, probably reviewing the latest social media storm. And then they agreed. That evening, a new press release went live. Julia Carter reinstated. Thomas Green placed on indefinite administrative leave pending investigation. Internal audits launched. New ethics committee announced. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something deeper, momentum, because the real work was just beginning. Sarah and I convened a meeting with department heads. We issued anonymous surveys, set up whistleblower protocols, suspended questionable vendor contracts, launched leadership training sessions. Within 48 hours, the culture started to shift. Not drastically, but noticeably. The staff who had been ignored began to speak. The ones who had hidden began to listen. And for the first time in a long while, I saw something in their eyes I hadn't seen in years. Hope. The headlines changed, but more importantly, so did the story. Not just mine. Everyone's. I had seen the Belgrave from every angle. I had watched it from the top floor boardroom and swept its back hallways at 2 a.m. when housekeeping was understaffed. But that week, I was seeing it through a new lens, as a woman returning not to serve, but to command. And command meant consequences. Room 1412 had always been reserved for VIPs, celebrities, diplomats, billionaires with egos as large as their bank accounts. It was also the room Thomas Green used to hold his private meetings, the ones he never logged, the ones where hotel policy mysteriously bent. It was time I paid it a visit. I entered 1412 with my new assistant Lila, a sharp 26-year-old I had recruited from outside the Belgrave. Her loyalty wasn't tied to the old regime. She carried a slim case of files and a recording device. Inside the suite, we found nothing at first, just the scent of stale cologne and arrogance. But then Lila pulled back the desk drawer. A second cell phone, a handwritten ledger, and a flash drive taped to the bottom. Jackpot. I had Lila photograph everything on site before we moved it. The phone was encrypted, but the flash drive opened with a single click. Inside, messages saved from Green's private channels, backups of conversations with vendors, some marked with code names, others brazenly spelled out bonuses, undisclosed commissions, and threats against non-compliant partners. There were names, dates, dollar amounts, and then internal documents. HR complaints suppressed with executive override. Disciplinary actions reversed with no explanation. Even a scanned copy of a staff NDA with a note in Green's handwriting. Keep this. One scared. This was no longer internal corruption. It was corporate malfeasance. I looped in legal immediately. Our in-house counsel, Marla, reviewed the files with wide eyes. You realize this isn't just grounds for termination. This is criminal. We'll need outside counsel. Possibly law enforcement. Start the process, I told her. And clear the boardroom. Emergency session, now. 2 hours later, I walked into the executive floor with Sarah at my side. She carried the master binder, labeled simply 1412. Green wasn't invited, but he came anyway. "You can't bar me," he said, pushing past Marla at the doorway. "This is still my hotel." "Not anymore," I said. "But since you're here, you might want to sit down?" He didn't. He hovered, arms folded, as I distributed folders to every board member. Sarah cued the presentation on the screen. Over the past week, in reviewing the suite once reserved exclusively for Mr. Green, we uncovered physical and digital evidence of extensive misconduct. The data includes conversations regarding unauthorized vendor deals, threats to staff, and coercion of internal departments to falsify documentation. The room was silent. I continued. In addition to these, we recovered a flash drive from room 1412. On it, backup records of conversations, payout summaries, and lists of individuals who were allegedly bribed or blacklisted. Cross-checking these, names reveals patterns of sudden terminations and abrupt vendor contract changes. One board member flipped a page, his brow furrowed. Another slowly leaned back in his chair. Nobody interrupted. Not even Green. "This is a setup," he finally said, voice strained. "Anyone could have planted that." "We traced the metadata," Sarah replied evenly. "Everything links back to your device. The handwriting has already been verified preliminarily by forensic review. And several employees have come forward confirming they were pressured directly by you." "This is outrageous," Green snapped. "No," I said quietly. "This is overdue." After he was escorted out, the board convened in closed session. 3 hours later, the vote was unanimous. Green's contract was voided. All access revoked. His severance withdrawn. Press charges pending. The hotel released a statement that evening. Belgrave was entering a new era of transparency. Effective immediately, a full audit was underway. And room 1412? It was renamed the Ethics Office. We gutted it, removed the plush carpets, replaced the mirrors, converted it into a fully transparent compliance hub. Glass doors, no locks. Sarah worked there now, and the nameplate on her door read simply, Director of Ethics. Guests who asked about the room got the same answer. That's where we make sure this place never forgets. For weeks afterward, I received calls from other hotels, executives asking how we'd handled the crisis, journalists pushing for exclusive interviews. I turned them all down, because this wasn't about publicity, it was about permanence. I sat in my office late one evening, lights dim, reviewing new hiring protocols. A knock came. Lila. "We just got 3 vendor refund requests that match Green's flagged list," she said. "Send them to Sarah," I replied. "Let's make sure they get paid," with an apology. I leaned back in my chair and looked out over the city. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the part where the woman who got framed, fired, and forgotten rebuilt everything they broke and made sure no one ever used power the way Green had again. Justice wasn't the finish line. It was just the gate, and I had the keys. The days after Green's fall felt different. Not quiet, but charged. The kind of electricity that lingers before a storm breaks. And this storm wasn't over. With Green gone, the hotel exhaled. Staff who once avoided eye contact now stopped. Me in hallways. They shared stories, old wounds, hushed confessions. What Green had done wasn't limited to fraud. It was intimidation, isolation, a slow erasure of humanity in favor of numbers. And now the healing had to begin. Sarah and I met daily in room 1412, now the Ethics Office. We reviewed whistleblower reports, adjusted outdated policies, and sat through tearful conversations with staff who had felt invisible for too long. One housekeeper, Maria, had been written up 6 times for attitude. But the real reason? She refused to clean Green's suite while he was inside. We tore those records up. We reinstated staff who had been pushed out unjustly. We issued public apologies. We replaced department heads who had enabled the toxicity. And I made it known. Silence was no longer policy. But with that change came friction. Not everyone welcomed the new era. A few senior managers, holdovers from Green's regime, resisted. They delayed reform, undermined meetings, whispered that I was overstepping, so I invited them to a conference room one afternoon. Let's be clear, I said. We're not rebuilding a version of the old Belgrave. We're creating something entirely different. If you're not on board with that, I'll accept your resignation today. No hard feelings. 2 left by morning. The 3rd changed tone. I wasn't just fighting Green's legacy. I was erasing it. The press continued to call. I ignored most. But one day I picked up. The journalist on the other end had a calm voice. I don't want a takedown story. I want a rebirth story. The kind that says, here's what happens when you do it right. I paused, then said, come to the hotel. But you're not interviewing me. You're interviewing my staff. 3 days later, the feature went live. The Woman Who Rewired. A giant from the inside out. It went viral. Applications flooded in, not just from hospitality professionals, but from activists, counselors, and educators. People who had never considered hotel work now wanted to be part of something bigger. That's when the idea hit me. This couldn't stop at one building. The Belgrave was part of a chain. 12 properties across the country. Most had their own green. Some worse. I pitched it to the board, a traveling reform initiative. We'd visit each location, audit their practices, offer resources, train ethics teams. The board blinked, then nodded. I called it the Reclaim Project. We started with Belgrave, Seattle, then Atlanta, then Phoenix. Each stop came with pushback. Some GMs refused our entry. Some HR leads lost documents. But we came prepared, with policies, with support, and most of all, with proof that change was profitable. By the 3rd hotel, staff started emailing us before we even arrived. Please help us. I've been waiting for someone like you. My manager says I'm lucky to still be here. Am I? At night, I lay awake in hotel rooms thinking of all the people who had endured what I had. And worse. People without backup drives, without Sarah's, without a room 1412 to unlock. And I knew this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. But legacy came with weight. In Dallas, the regional director refused to meet with me, sent an intern instead. In Chicago, someone tried to erase internal audit files before we arrived. In Boston, a former Green ally tried to stage a smear campaign against Sarah, accusing her of manipulating staff. We countered with transparency, released all findings, allowed anonymous staff surveys to be published unedited. Truth became our shield and our sword. One evening, after a particularly brutal audit in Miami, I returned to my room and found a letter. No name. Just handwriting I recognized. You think you've won, but you're just building another castle. And castles always fall. T.I. read it twice. It wasn't a threat. It was fear, wrapped in bitterness. I folded the note and slid it into a drawer. Then I locked it. Because this wasn't a castle. This was a network. A movement. A system built not on fear, but on accountability. Green had built empires on silence. I was building something louder. At our 1-year mark, the Reclaim Project had reached all 12 Belgrave hotels. Staff satisfaction had risen by 34%. Employee turnover dropped. And for the first time, the Belgrave name was synonymous not with luxury, but with dignity. On the anniversary of my reinstatement, we held a small gathering in room 1412. Maria was there, Lila too. Sarah raised a toast, and I said only this. This began with silence. It ends with voice. And I meant it, because I was never just rebuilding a hotel. I was building a future where no one had to be me, just to be heard, and we were only getting started. A year and a half after my suspension, I stood on the stage of the Belgrave Leadership Summit, holding a microphone that once belonged to Green. The ballroom was filled with executives, staff, and newly appointed ethics officers from across the country. Behind me, a screen displayed our mission in bold white letters: accountability, transparency, human-first leadership. I wasn't nervous. I was grounded. This isn't about correcting the past anymore, I said into the mic. It's about defining the future. We used to hide behind phrases like industry standard and brand reputation. But those terms don't protect people. We do. The applause was real, earned. After the summit, I walked the familiar halls of the Belgrave. No longer a place of secrets. Every hallway had a feedback kiosk. Every department had peer-elected representatives. HR was no longer a weapon, it was a lifeline. Room 1412 remained untouched, sacred. Not because of the corruption it once held, but because of what we transformed it into. There was now a plaque outside. This room once held silence. Now, it echoes with change. Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered. Protesters? No, graduates. We had just launched the Reclaim Fellowship, a training program for whistleblowers, reformers, and future ethical leaders in hospitality. One of them, a young man named Malik, pulled me aside. "I was in your shoes," he said. "Different city, same suppression. But your story? It cracked something open in me. And now, I want to be part of this." I gripped his hand tightly. "You already are." Later that night, I returned to my office and opened the drawer where I had kept Green's final letter. It was still there, folded, silent. But I wasn't. I pulled it out, read it one last time, then fed it into the shredder. Slowly, with intention. That was the moment I let it go. Not just the man, but the shadow he had cast. I didn't need him. To validate my win? I didn't need the world to know every detail. What mattered was that people could finally breathe inside the walls we once feared. And the blueprint we built here? It wouldn't stop at Belgrave. We had already begun consulting other industries, healthcare, education, retail, anywhere systems had turned cold. Anywhere people were told to shrink. The future wasn't corporate. It was human. And I was ready to lead it. Not as a manager, not even as a CEO, but as a survivor who refused to stay quiet. That's my story. And now, it belongs to everyone who needs it.